You know that feeling, right? The one before a big presentation where your stomach does flips.
Oh, yeah, butterflies. Or maybe it's just irritation in traffic.
Or even something heavier like grief. We tend to just lump it all under stress, but the sources you shared show it's much more complex than that.
Absolutely. Stress is this huge umbrella term, isn't it? We use it for fear, anxiety, sure, but also, like you said, irritation, embarrassment.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really
Mm.
does. And the sources dig into how it's not just about negative feelings either. It can be positive things too.
Like what?
Well, the excitement before getting married, maybe, or the focus you feel in a sports competition, that's stress too, technically.
Huh. Okay. And it's definitely not just happening in our heads, is it? These sources really break down how it shows up everywhere.
Right. Emotionally, obviously.
Right.
But physiologically, too, you mentioned butterflies, maybe headaches,
Yeah, or behaviorally, like maybe smoking more or...
or just withdrawing. And cognitively, too, that constant worry, the inability to focus sometimes.
It touches everything. And the common view is always that it's bad, something to get rid of.
That's the default, yeah. But one of the really key early ideas in your sources comes from Selye. He made this important distinction
Between
between distress, that's the negative kind we usually think of, and eustress.
eustress, the good stress.
Exactly. The kind that can actually be motivating, exciting, like the buzz before performing you mentioned that could be eustress. Whereas maybe dreading a deadline is distress.
Okay, that distinction alone kind of shifts things. And then you had Holmes and Rawhead. They threw another idea in there.
They did. They suggested maybe stressors aren't inherently good or bad. They're just life events. Anything that forces you to adapt or adjust,
Positive or negative?
positive or negative. Getting fired, getting promoted, getting married, moving house.
So big changes.
Right. They even created this thing called the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, the SRS.
Okay.
And the idea was the more of these life changes you stack up in a short period, the higher your score
Right.
and the higher your chance of getting sick.
Wow. So even good changes could add up to a health risk.
According to their model, yeah. A wedding and a new job in the same year could potentially increase your vulnerability.
Interesting. And their work really kicked off a debate, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It highlighted this core question that runs through pretty much all the material. Is stress about the objective things happening to us, or is it more about how we, interpret them, our appraisal?
That seems crucial. Let's maybe start with the real basics, the biology. Your sources go way back to Walter Cannon.
The fight or flight guy.
Right, our ancient alarm system.
Yeah.
Built-in protection.
Yeah, think cave dweller facing a saber-toothed tiger. That's the classic example.
No time to think, just react.
Exactly. Your body needs an immediate physical response for survival. Cannon saw this rush either confront the threat or run away as the core mechanism.
Fight or flee. And he also talked about homeostasis, right?
He did. That's the body's natural tendency to want to return to a stable state, a baseline, after the stressor has passed. The system ramps up, does its job, then ideally winds down.
Okay, so what happens during that ramping up? What does fight or flight actually do to the body?
It's a whole body response, really. Your heart rate shoots up, blood pressure increases,
Pumping blood faster.
right, to your muscles and brain. Your muscles tense up, ready for action. Digestion, that basically shuts down to save energy.
Okay.
Breathing gets faster, shallower maybe, to get more oxygen in. You might start sweating to cool the body down.
Hormones too, right? Adrenaline.
Huge surge of hormones, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. They provide that massive burst of energy and focus. Even your senses can sharpen vision. Hearing become more acute.
It's an amazing system for dealing with a physical threat like a tiger.
Perfectly adapted for that scenario. But, and this is the big but your sources highlight.
Our modern threats aren't usually tigers.
Exactly. They're what some call the saber-toothed tigers of our minds.
Like an angry email or a looming deadline. Public speaking.
Precisely. Financial worries, relationship conflict. Your body still interprets these as danger and triggers the same ancient physiological cascade.
But you can't physically fight an email or run away from a deadline.
There's no physical release. So the system gets activated, but the energy isn't discharged in the way it was designed to be.
And if that happens over and over, if that alarm keeps ringing day after day,
Well, that's when the system that's meant to save you starts to potentially harm you. If the body never fully returns to homeostasis, if it's stuck in this state of high alert,
chronic activation.
right, that chronic activation can lead to all sorts of problems. We're talking hypertension, chronic headaches or migraines, digestive issues, maybe even a weakened immune system over time. The very response designed for short-term survival wears you down long-term.
Which brings us back to Selye, but this time looking at the longer-term picture.
Yeah, his general adaptation syndrome, or GAs. If Cannon described the immediate sprint, Selye looked at the effects of the marathon of chronic stress.
What happens when the stressor doesn't go away quickly?
Exactly. He mapped it out in 3 stages. First, the alarm stage.
That's fight or flight again?
Pretty much. The initial shock, the body mobilizing its resources via the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay, stage 1. Alarm. Then?
If the stress continues, you enter the resistance stage. Here, the body is actively trying to cope, to adapt to the ongoing stressor. It's still mobilized, still burning energy, but it's starting to deplete its reserves.
Like trying to keep sprinting indefinitely. You can't.
You really can't. And if the stress still doesn't let up, you eventually hit the 3rd stage, exhaustion.
Sound bad.
It is. The body's resources are drained. Its systems start to break down under the prolonged strain. This is where Selye saw the increased vulnerability to illness, serious conditions like heart disease, or even premature death.
That constant strain. There's a term for that, wear and tear, right?
Allostatic load, yeah, it's a really useful concept. It refers to the cumulative biological burden, the wear and tear on the body systems that results from chronic stress exposure and the body trying to adapt.
And there's another related idea, the diathesis stress model.
So similar, yeah. It suggests that illness often results from an interaction between stress in the environment and an individual's pre-existing vulnerability, the diathesis.
Like a weak link.
Kind of. Maybe you have a genetic predisposition to cardiovascular issues. Chronic stress might then trigger problems in that system specifically. It's the stress hitting your particular biological weak spot.
Makes sense. But the sources also mention some limitations with Selye's GAS model.
They do. While it was groundbreaking, it was very focused on the biological response. It didn't fully account for the psychological factors.
Like how we think about the stress.
Exactly. And it also kind of implied all stressors lead to the same general response, which research later showed isn't quite true. Different stressors can have slightly different physiological signatures.
Which leads us neatly into the psychological side of things. If it's not just the event.
Then maybe how we perceive it is the crucial factor. And that's where Richard Lazarus comes in. His work really shifted the focus onto subjective appraisal.
Appraisal meaning how we evaluate the situation.
Precisely. His cognitive model is, I think, incredibly insightful. It starts with what he called primary appraisal.
Okay.
When something potentially stressful happens, you first ask yourself, consciously or unconsciously, what does this mean for me? Is it irrelevant? Is it good? Or is it potentially stressful?
And if you decide it is potentially stressful,
then you make a further judgment. Is it a harm loss, meaning damage has already been done, like losing your job or a relationship ending?
Okay.
Or is it a threat, meaning there's potential for future harm or loss, like worrying you might fail an upcoming exam?
Right.
Or, and this is key, is it a challenge? Seeing the event as an opportunity for growth, mastery, or gain, like viewing that same exam as a chance to demonstrate what you know.
So the same event, the exam could be appraised as a threat or a challenge.
Exactly. And that appraisal makes all the difference. Appraising it as a threat might lead to anxiety, maybe poor preparation. Appraising it as a challenge could lead to feeling energized, focused, motivated.
Huge difference. So that's primary appraisal. What comes next?
Secondary appraisal. Once you've decided the event is stressful, whether harm, threat, or challenge, you then ask, okay, what can I do about it? Can I cope? What resources, internal or external, do I have available?
So evaluating your coping options and your ability to handle it.
Yes. And a critical finding here, highlighted in your sources, is the role of perceived control.
How much control you feel you have.
Exactly. The less control you perceive, generally, the more stressful the situation feels, often regardless of the objective level of control you actually possess.
There was an experiment mentioned with noise.
Right, the Core and BAFA study. Participants were exposed to loud, unpleasant noise. One group was simply told they had a button they could press to stop the noise, even if they never actually pressed it.
And the other group didn't have that option.
Correct. The group that believed they had control, even without using it, showed significantly less physiological stress response than the group that felt helpless.
Wow. So just the belief in control made a difference.
A huge difference. It shows how powerful our subjective appraisal is. It wasn't the noise itself entirely. It was the perceived ability to manage it.
That ties into another concept mentioned, self-efficacy. From Bandura.
Absolutely. Self-efficacy is your belief in your own ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish a task. It feeds directly into that secondary appraisal.
How so?
Well, if you have high self-efficacy regarding a potential stressor, say, you believe you have the skills to handle a difficult conversation. Your secondary appraisal will be much more positive. You'll feel you have the resources to cope.
Makes sense. Bandura broke it down further, didn't he?
He did. Into outcome expectation, believing that a certain action will lead to a certain outcome. And efficacy expectation, believing that you personally can successfully perform that action.
So it's not just knowing what to do, but believing you can do it.
That's the crucial part for feeling less stressed and more in control, the efficacy expectation.
And Lazarus said this whole appraisal thing isn't static, right? It's ongoing.
Yes, he called it reappraisal. We're constantly reevaluating the situation based on new information, feedback from the environment, and how our initial coping efforts are working out.
So a situation you first saw as a major threat might, over time, be reappraised as a challenge you can handle.
Or vice versa. Unfortunately, it's a dynamic process. And he also linked specific appraisals to specific emotions through what he called correlational themes.
For example.
Like appraising a situation as involving a demeaning offense against me or mine is the core theme linked to anger. Appraising it as facing an uncertain threat links to anxiety.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've traced how we understand stress from biology to psychology. What about health itself? How do we even define that? Your sources showed a shift there, too.
A really significant shift, yeah. Moving from the traditional biomedical model to the biopsychosocial model.
Yeah, it's the difference there.
The biomedical model is probably what most of us grew up with. It basically says health is simply the absence of disease or physical malfunction.
So you're either sick or you're not sick.
Pretty much. It focuses almost exclusively on biological factors, sees the mind and body as separate entities, and tends to view the person as a passive victim of illness, with the doctor responsible for the fix.
Okay, that sounds limited.
It is, in many ways. The biopsychosocial model offers a much broader, more integrated view.
How so?
It argues that health and illness are the result of a complex interplay between biological factors, like genetics, infections, psychological factors, like thoughts, emotions, behaviors, stress levels, and social factors, like relationships, culture, socioeconomic status.
So all three interact.
Constantly. And critically, health isn't seen as just on-off, sick-well. It's viewed as a continuum, ranging from severe illness all the way up to optimal wellness or thriving.
And mind and body.
Seen as deeply interconnected, influencing each other. Plus, the individual isn't passive. Our behaviors, our coping strategies, our social connections actively contribute to our position on that health continuum.
That broader view must have opened up new fields of study.
Absolutely. It paved the way for things like psychosomatic medicine, which directly challenged that old mind-body split. Then behavioral medicine, applying behavioral science principles to health issues like using conditioning to help people quit smoking.
And health psychology.
Using psychological principles specifically to promote health, prevent illness, and improve healthcare systems. And then the even broader concept of wellness emerged.
Which is more about?
A more holistic, active approach, not just avoiding sickness, but actively pursuing high-level well-being. Physical, mental, social, spiritual. It includes things like stress management, nutrition, fitness, personal growth.
It sounds a lot like that World Health Organization definition you included.
It aligns perfectly.
Yeah.
WHO defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity.
That's a really high standard, complete well-being.
It is, but it sets the aspirational goal, moving beyond just not being sick.
So if we're aiming for that positive end of the spectrum, that thriving state, there was another model in the sources that seemed really relevant, Antonovsky's.
Aaron Antonovsky's Salutogenic model. Yes, this is another fascinating shift in perspective.
Salutogenesis.
Origins of health.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on pathogenesis, the origins of disease, asking why do people get sick? Antonovsky asked, why, despite all the challenges and difficulties, do people stay healthy? What are the origins of health?
That's a fundamentally different question.
It really is. He started from the assumption that life is inherently stressful, chaotic even. He used the term entropy, the tendency for systems to move towards disorder. His question was, how do humans resist this pull towards disorder and maintain health?
Okay, and his answer involved
Something he called generalized resistance resources, or GRRs.
GRRs.
Like what?
These are the characteristics of a person, group, or environment that help people cope effectively with stressors and avoid breakdown. They can be physical resources like money or genetics, cognitive emotional resources like knowledge or optimism, social resources like strong relationships or cultural stability.
So the tools and assets we have to deal with life's challenges.
Pretty much. And he argued that our life experiences, particularly the kinds of GRRs we have access to and learn to use, shape our overall orientation to the world, something he termed the sense of coherence, or SOC.
Sense of coherence. Okay, what is that?
He defined it as a global orientation, a pervasive feeling of confidence that things are generally understandable, manageable, and meaningful. It tends to become relatively stable by early adulthood.
Understandable, manageable, meaningful. Can you break those down?
Sure. Comprehensibility is the cognitive part. It's the extent to which you perceive the stimuli you encounter, internal and external, as making sense, as being ordered, consistent, predictable, rather than chaotic and random.
So feeling like you can understand what's going on.
Right. Manageability is the belief that you have the resources, either personal or available through your network, to meet the demands placed upon you. It's that secondary appraisal piece. Again, feeling capable of coping.
Believing you can handle it.
Yes. And finally, meaningfulness. This is the motivational component, and Antonovsky saw it as the most important. It's the extent to which you feel that life makes emotional sense, that the demands you face are seen as challenges worthy of your energy, investment, and engagement.
So feeling like life's struggles are worth engaging with.
Exactly. It provides the why, the motivation to even try to comprehend and manage. A strong SOC, combining all three, acts like a powerful buffer against stress.
How does it buffer stress?
Several ways. It likely influences physiological responses directly, promotes healthier behaviors because you feel life is worth investing in, and definitely shapes your appraisal process. You're more likely to see stressors as manageable challenges rather than overwhelming threats.
It sounds like a core component of resilience.
It really is. That example in your sources about the child Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, that was striking.
Those who, despite horrific early trauma, developed a strong sense of coherence in later life, showed remarkable resilience, much lower rates of PTSD compared to survivors with weaker SOC even decades later.
It really highlights the power of that internal framework finding meaning, believing you can cope even in the face of extreme adversity.
It shifts the focus beautifully from just pathology to understanding the factors that promote enduring health and well-being.
Okay, so let's tie some of this together. We've got the biology, the psychology, the models of health. How does all this impact everyday things, like how well we perform at work or even how long we might live?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that chronic, poorly managed stress takes a toll across the board. Cognitively, it can impair focus, memory, decision-making. Emotionally, it fuels anxiety, irritability, depression. Physiologically, we've talked about the long-term health risks. And behaviorally, it often pushes us toward unhealthy coping mechanisms.
All of which would hurt performance, relationships, everything.
Definitely. And this connects to that classic concept, the Yerkes-Dodson curve.
Right, the upside-down U-shape.
Exactly. It shows that performance isn't best when stress or arousal is zero. That's boredom, low motivation. Performance is also poor when stress is extremely high. That's feeling overwhelmed, anxious, unable to function.
So the peak performance is somewhere in the middle.
Right at that sweet spot, the optimal level of arousal. Enough stress to be engaged and focused, but not so much that it becomes debilitating. The Goldilocks zone, just right.
So the aim of stress management isn't necessarily to eliminate stress entirely.
No, that's probably impossible and maybe even undesirable. The goal is to manage demands and our responses so we can stay in or return quickly to that optimal performance zone more often.
And the link to longevity?
It's significant. Chronic stress is linked to killer diseases like heart disease,
Yeah.
but maybe even more importantly, stress heavily influences lifestyle choices.
Also.
When we're stressed, we're much more likely to engage in unhealthy behaviors, smoking, drinking too much, eating poorly, being sedentary. And those lifestyle factors are huge drivers of longevity or lack thereof.
It's that vicious cycle again, isn't it? Stress leads to bad habits worsen health, poor health creates more stress.
Precisely. It becomes a downward spiral. So, managing lifestyle, getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, maintaining social connections isn't just good for general health. It's a fundamental strategy for managing stress effectively and promoting a longer, healthier life.
Okay. That covers managing the negative impacts.
Yep.
But there was one more perspective in the sources. Positive psychology.
Right. This builds on everything we've discussed, but takes a different angle. Instead of focusing primarily on fixing what's wrong, reducing distress, treating illness. It focuses on actively cultivating what's right.
Building strengths, positive experiences.
Exactly. It connects back to Selye's eustress, to Lazarus's idea of challenge appraisals.
Hmm.
It asks, how can we not just survive difficulties, but actually grow from them? How can we build psychological well-being and flourish?
So it's about more than just getting back to zero, back to neutral.
Much more. Positive psychology studies things like positive emotions, joy, gratitude, hope, character strengths like courage, kindness, wisdom, and positive institutions like supportive families or workplaces. The overarching goal is often described as understanding and fostering the good life.
A fulfilling life, not just an absence of suffering.
Yes, and living that good life, according to this perspective, involves things like cultivating positive relationships, engaging in meaningful activities, developing self-regulation, finding purpose.
So instead of only managing stress to avoid burnout, you'd also focus on building optimism or finding activities that put you in a state of flow.
Precisely.
Oh, well.
Or practicing mindfulness, identifying your core values and living by them. These aren't just coping mechanisms. They are ways to proactively build a richer, more satisfying, and ultimately more resilient life. It's about moving up Antonovsky's continuum towards optimal well-being.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the raw biology of fight or flight
To the intricate psychologies how we interpret events,
through evolving ideas about what health even is.
to the long-term impact of chronic stress and the importance of our internal resources like sense of coherence.
And finally, landing on this idea of not just managing the bad, but actively building the good through positive psychology.
It really shows how understanding something as common as stress involves so many layers: biological, psychological, social, even philosophical in a way.
It definitely does. So, for you listening, as you reflect on all this, maybe consider, how does your own typical way of looking at things, your appraisals, maybe your sense of coherence, how does that shape your experience when things get tough?
And perhaps, what's one small shift you could make? Maybe in perspective, seeing a recurring annoyance as a challenge to practice patience, or in action reaching out to strengthen a social connection, one of those GRRs.
Just a small step that might move you a little closer to that optimal zone or a bit further along that path towards not just coping, but genuinely thriving. Something to think about.